And ah, I was supposed to wait till after that. I'm going to do that again so we get it on the recording. Um, Welcome, everybody. I'm David Bank. I'm the founder and editor of Impact Alpha. And welcome to call number 71, Ramping Up Green Lending, even without that $20 billion. Um, and a couple housekeeping things. I think the folks who've been on calls before know that the chat is often the lively, well, the call is lively too, but the chat is often very lively. So Christopher Wilson jumped in, and you all should introduce yourselves, say a little bit, just say where you're coming from, geographically as well as any other way, and kind of your connection to green lending and community infrastructure. And we'll round all of this up, the call as well as the participants with a replay in the Friday brief. And so you can share that with your friends who weren't able to make it. And let's see, Zulema usually does this, so I'm vamping on what the logistics are here. It's being recorded, as you saw. And I think let's just jump right in. I want to bring in my colleague, Amy Cortez, whose byline you've seen many times in Impact Alpha, and many of you know. Hi, Amy.
Hi, David. Hi, everyone. Yes, we've been writing about this a lot. Like a lot of people, were very excited about the GGRF and the promise of this distributed green bank that it was going to set up that could reach into low-income communities. So, we're kind of watching this situation play out as a little bit of a bellwether of the broader climate investment landscape, because despite the headwinds, right, that we all hear about, we're hearing from investors that the fundamentals are still in place and they're full steam ahead. So what's needed now is really connecting these issues to the mainstream pocketbook issues, right, that so many Americans are concerned about. And that brings us to our discussion today.
That's great. That's great. I knew I forgot something earlier. I wanted to flag our next call, which is Tuesday, June 24th. And I think or Isaac can drop the link in the chat, but you get early bird access to the next call as well. Investing in shared prosperity opportunities for policy action, which we're producing with the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance. That's on a Tuesday, not a Wednesday. Okay, let's introduce the folks, Amy and Beth Bafford, Climate United and Calvert Impact. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you so much.
And Amir Kirkwood, Justice Climate Fund. Thanks for joining us, Amir.
Thanks for having me, David.
And Curtis Probst from, what do we say, NYCEEC, I think, right?
NYCEEC, yeah, you got it.
NYCEEC.
Yeah, thanks, David. Really happy to be here, and it's wonderful to share the panel with all these talented green financiers.
Great, great. And then finally, Aaron Seybert, the Managing Director of Social Investments at the Kresge Foundation. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks for having me.
Beth, let's kick off with you, if that's okay. Just want to sort of ground folks in what we're talking about. We've been talking about the pipeline of deals, and I know we've covered and you've done a number of deals, but just tell us like what kinds of things we're talking about financing, just the kinds of projects that you're seeing.
Yeah, so just kind of from the broadest level, a reminder of essentially what the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was meant to do and what so many partners in the ecosystem have been kind of gearing up to do for years now. And the basic kind of summary is that the clean energy transition is inevitable, right? It's happening. There's not going to be a lot of things that are going to stop the transition from happening. Who benefits from the transition is not inevitable. And that is really the driving force behind a lot of the intersection between policymaking, impact investing, community development that's happened over the last decade or so, which is a lot of this infrastructure, folks on the ground, green banks, CDFIs, community banks, MDIs, specialty finance providers, foundations, organizations that are saying, here is this enormous opportunity. This is a massive shift in how our economy is functioning, how we power everything. And we have an opportunity to look at who benefits from that transition across the board. And when we talk about those benefits, I think of them in 4 categories, right? There's the direct benefits of clean energy, which is lower costs and better technology. There's the economic benefits, which is who's building the stuff. So the job creation, the tax revenue, the local revenue that comes from building both the manufacturing side and the deployment of technologies. There's the health benefits. So how are we cleaning up air and water as we think about the transition? And then there's the resilience and preparedness, right? We know that clean energy support, reduces the impact of climate change, tries to reduce the incidence of natural disasters, but also looks at when natural disasters hit, how are communities more resilient and able to survive through those disasters. That's an enormous amount of benefits across the entire economy. And so what we want to do is just make sure that those benefits are happening everywhere, and not just where there's existing concentrations of wealth, existing concentrations of population, access to credit, access to capital. And so that basic thesis, right, that is the same no matter who is in Washington, no matter what the feelings are of the federal government. This is an economic shift that's happening and will happen regardless of political wins. And so it's really looking at us as an industry and us as organizations and saying, okay, the whole reason we exist is to lean in to these challenges and opportunities when others lean out. And so there is a lot of leaning out happening right now. There's a lot of leaning out on all sorts of things, right? On clean energy financing, on opportunities in low-income and disadvantaged communities, in thinking about investments in a more equitable future. And so we need to lean in regardless of what is happening in Washington and the policy implications. And that's where this industry shines and has done so in so many economic challenges, natural disasters, and kind of macroeconomic movements in the past. And it's another moment where we all need to collectively step up. And so we are looking at Calvert Impact and Climate United, how we do that regardless of the outcome of the lawsuit and the fight for the GGRF program, looking across the tools that we have in our toolkit and on the platform, and really understanding how do we continue to push clean energy investments forward across our work in partnership with others, so that we can continue to drive the benefits of the transition in the places and for the people that don't naturally stand to benefit, but really who should.
Right, right. We will get to the litigation update, which I know folks are interested in, but we're trying to sort of push ahead. So I just want to sort of just drill down one level, which is a lot of these projects, as I understand, they'll pencil out, they'll have savings in cost over time. They make economic sense, whether it's, electric vehicles or solar or what have you. So why wouldn't they be able to be financed in the normal course of business?
Yeah, so I think it
Like,
depends
what's the
on
gap?
like where within these markets we're looking. And what we're doing right now is basically looking at the full set of pipeline opportunities that we see in the market, and then figuring out which of those pipeline opportunities we can continue to push forward that don't need as deep of subsidy, where the investment does pencil, even though it might not maximize returns, and really looking at how we can get those deals done. And then in hopes where if there's additional subsidy or support that's coming, that we can do even more of that. But yes, I mean, a lot of these, the way I think about it, and we talk about this a little bit in some of our Impact Alpha pieces, is, private capital flows naturally to the easiest things, right? It's like water flowing down a mountain, right? It will go the easiest path to where there's the best data, biggest companies, most track record. That's where the brain damage is limited, transaction costs are lower, and private capital naturally flows. And our job and our work, and and the organization, all the organizations that are on this screen, and a lot of the folks in the chat, right? Our work is to dig the new trenches to allow capital to flow to places where it naturally does not in the private markets. And it's doesn't flow because it's either harder, or it takes different sources of capital to come together, or it takes technical solutions, services, and expertise, as well as capital deployment. It takes structuring. It takes additional work, and that is really what we were built to do as an organization and as an industry. And there are plenty of opportunities for investment that still exist, even with the current policy landscape and the uncertainty that's being created both in the administration and on the Hill.
Great. And so again, like just so everybody understands, you said you've gone through the pipeline and categorized it. Like, what is kind of in the could work if there was some additional catalytic elements?
Yeah, so I mean, the focus of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is initially on 3 sectors. So we've really been going deep in those 3 sectors. So building decarbonization, electric transportation, and distributed generation and storage. And we see opportunities across each of those 3 sectors that are more market-based, that are still possible. So we're looking at work within transportation, where we can try to unlock access to electric trucking and truck charging, where there's real opportunity there. Some of that leans on state support instead of federal support, but we think there are models there that can work. Certainly in solar, we've been focused on financing solar in hard to finance solar markets. So where there are electricity prices that are lower, or where there's complications with solar development. We still think there's a real market there, both for pre-development, construction, and permanent financing. The permanent financing is a little harder to do with purely private capital because of the tenors, but certainly still something that we're looking at. And then within buildings, we're really looking at the hard to decarbonize building areas, so small commercial properties, schools, health centers, and really looking at where within that space we can push forward. We're doing some of that through our existing CPACE work, so continuing to grow our cut carbon portfolio. I think there's some opportunities there, but other structures as well. So we still see investable opportunities across the sectors. It's just a question of kind of the investment structure, the risk return profile, the tenor profiles in terms of what we can do in other balance sheets, kind of with other balance sheets, versus what we could do with the GGRF funds.
Great. Amy's got a question, but I just want to jump in and ask our participants to lend us a hand here. There's a lot of acronyms flying around, and I want participants will get a gold star if they in the chat just dissect the acronyms a little bit. CPACE, GGRF, CDFI, MDI. Then we won't have to slow the conversation down, but folks will know what all the acronyms mean. So Amy.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to what you were saying, Beth. What you're describing is what you and your colleague Jen Price, and I've shared the guest posts in the chat that each of you wrote separately, but this concept of market shaping, which is what Calvert, has always done and does so well. But talk about that a little bit more, like writ large, like, we've focused on, deals and bespoke deals, but how do we everything we're talking about here is like sort of moving to a more like structured private sector way of solving some of these gaps that we're seeing in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And like everything in our space, there are a lot of different terms for this. So certainly won't say there's just one, but market shaping, market making, systems level investing, systemic investing, all kind of a little bit of a different way of thinking about it, but all similar concept. But it basically breaks down into the fact that the challenges in markets where capital does not flow efficiently are not often organized neatly into asset classes. And so the way that money flows, right, is typically organized into asset classes. public equities or private equity or credit or infrastructure finance. And the challenges in many markets that are not being served are broader than just one tool. And so the basic premise is to really try to solve a market challenge, to unlock new markets. You have to bring a bunch of different tools to the table at different times to do so. And so the ability to have access to that broader toolkit is really important if you really actually want to change the trajectory of the market. And that's one of the reasons we started building out our platform more than just one product, because we saw for 25 years, right, that bringing only senior debt to the marketplace, for the purposes of supporting financial intermediaries was really important, but was not going to solve the problems that we were trying to solve alone, right? We needed to have more tools in the toolkit to do that. And so looking at ways that we can bring other tools in order to support some of the underlying challenges and markets we are trying to solve. And that's why we got so excited about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, right? This is a program that for the first time, policy recognized that we needed to have all the tools in the toolkit. We needed a spectrum of financial resources. We could do guarantees, equity, mezzanine debt, senior debt, warehousing structures, secondary market activities, like broad tools in the toolkit on the financing side. But it also had the ability to do market development, pre-development, provide some grant making, really looking at how we broadly build capacity to unlock these markets. And that's really how we developed Climate United strategy in partnership with Self-Help and CPC, each looking at where we work in the market and what are the tools that are actually needed to bring to the market to unlock broader private capital. And so CPC did that for the multifamily space and has been doing incredible work at looking at not just how do you finance decarbonization of multifamily affordable housing, but what are the tools and standardization and processes and data that's needed to actually prove that that works at scale. And then how do we shout that from the rooftops when it works so that we can change policy to really support broad decarbonization. Self-Help's doing that on the single family and consumer side in markets like electric vehicle access, single family mortgages, really looking at how we change the behavior of the markets, and then we're doing it on the non-residential side. And so that is the key kind of, I would say, the practical piece behind this market shaping concept is we need broader tools in the toolkit so that we can bring the right tool at the right time as markets evolve, if we're really hoping to open up much broader pools of capital investing in these solutions.
Great. And before we move on to Amir, who has been doing a lot of that capacity building work, Beth, can you give us sort of a quick update on the litigation and where that stands?
Yeah, I now have a law degree, which I was not expecting to get, but have been spending a lot of time with a lot of lawyers. So loss, just as a kind of reminder, we initiated the lawsuit against the EPA and Citibank on March 8th, which I will never forget because it's International Women's Day. We then got a very good initial ruling from the district court. So from Judge Chutkan, we got a preliminary injunction that basically said that the EPA acted unlawfully and that we should have access to our funds. The EPA then quickly appealed that decision to the DC Circuit Court, and we are not now in front of the Circuit Court litigating the appeal. So there was a briefing back and forth between us and the EPA lawyers. There was a hearing on May 19th, and we are now very impatiently waiting for the court ruling from the panel of judges on the appeal to then determine our next steps. So hopefully we'll have news in the next couple weeks, and we'll determine kind of what things look like going forward. I should say, very importantly, we have been joined in the lawsuit as additional plaintiffs from the three NCIF awardees, so ourselves, Coalition for Green Capital, and Power Forward Communities, by Justice Climate Fund, the OFN, Opportunity Finance Network, and Inclusive, who are CCIA awardees, and then 4 of the state green banks also have joined the case. So they're now, we are all consolidated into one lawsuit at this point.
Well, that's interesting, Beth, because you had an interesting post this week that made the point that you had originally intended to kind of lay low and try to have this kind of worked out quietly, and then that was not possible, and you stepped up, and there was sort of an interesting learning from that about stepping up and speaking out, and maybe you just want to say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think like many folks who get trained, kind of do scenario planning or training around crisis communications, there is this instinct to when crisis hits, to kind of see, lay low for a bit, see how it plays out, and see if it blows over, right? Especially in our media landscape now, there's so much happening so quickly. Some things hit and catch fire, some things, die down quickly. And so the initial guidance that we got and that kind of the strategy that we took was to just see if it would blow over. And it very much did not. In fact, it kind of accelerated in its speed and attention and kind of vitriol. And so we had to make a decision on what we were going to do, both from a legal strategy as well as from a communication strategy, and really decided to step in to try to get facts out there, get the truth out there, and try to counter some of the narrative. We recognize that our media environment is such these days that we are not likely to change a lot of minds, but we felt like we needed to be a voice in the conversation in a way that at least got our story out there. And that was terrifying, and still is. But I think it is something that we felt very strongly about, and wanted to kind of augment the legal process with something that was digestible for folks, so that people really knew what was happening, knew what was going on, and so that all of our partners could understand and plan and react. I mean, right? We are not the only ones affected by this, right? There are hundreds and hundreds of organizations across the country who've been planning for years to put this money to work. And they all need to understand what's happening and plan. And so if they weren't hearing our voice, we felt like it was a disservice to our community of partners. So, still learning a ton. Certainly can't say we've gotten it all right, but huge kudos to my team and our communications folks for really stepping in and defining and owning our story.
Wow. Well, thank you, Beth. Let's jump to Amir. As Beth said, Justice Climate is part of the litigation. But let's start somewhere else, Amir, and just tell us who your constituency is and what you were geared up to do, and then let's get to where that stands.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, David and Amy, for having us here on the call. So a little bit of background for the audience. Justice Climate Fund is a mission-driven nonprofit. We're tasked initially as formed to service a combination of community lenders through the CCIA program of the GGRF. No, that's a lot of acronyms. But our focus was really CDFI banks, minority depository institutions, and CDFI loan funds. And the primary focus was because these groups were critical in their communities, have been critical in their communities for decades, in the case of some MDIs, up to a century, in providing both commercial lending, small business lending, and residential lending. So if there was a commitment that would be made towards clean energy in communities, you would want this network of lenders to be right on the front lines of providing capital and also ultimately being funded. The other reason why these institutions are really critical is because they are, in many cases, first movers of capital, and in some cases also the only source of capital in communities. So they're a real part of the actual ultimate lifeline of capitalization in communities for some some communities. So we want to make sure that they're supported through the program. And so Justice Climate Fund itself was designed to work where we would ultimately arrange both the government funding through the CCIA program, but more importantly now, private investments that would work in partnership with these community lenders in order to provide clean energy lending. What we've learned from those intermediaries through our process, there were roughly 300 or so that are part of our network, and we've done a great deal of sort of research in their pipeline, helping them to define their pipelines, understand technical assistance needs, all these things. That roughly 800 project opportunities were sourced by 300 lenders. We had identified up to $8 billion worth of financing that would be used, again, assuming the ability to have the full $940 million that we were awarded, which was really, and it's critical to understand that because that included roughly $80 million of technical assistance funding. But even with that number, if you strip away what could not be moved forward without that technical assistance funding, we believe that there was still roughly $1 billion of financing that could move forward without the CCI program. But to be specific, what that means is, those transactions are going to be financed in part by those CDFI community lenders, but it would also mean that they would still need some form of third-party capital. And the reason why is that CDFIs tend to be, because they're community focused, small in balance sheet. So the typical CDFI in our network, and I'll just focus on the bank side for now, has approximately 400 million in assets under management on average. That means their loan portfolio is somewhere between 300 to $350 million of actual depository capacity, the balance being some form of debt or equity that supports their lending. So that means that their ticket size of lending is going to probably run to under $5 million. Well, as you know, a lot of these projects, especially the ones that are tied to some sort of commercial real estate financing, are going to exceed that amount in financing need. So the entire program of Justice Climate Fund was designed from the beginning to leverage that private capital, as Beth talked about earlier, really bringing in private capital and thinking about where we bring that private capital, not just in the different parts of a capital stack, but also in the different parts of the continuum of financing need. So there's pre-development needs, there's construction needs, there's bridge to takeout, there's takeout perm financing. And so the idea is that these lenders are going to play a valuable role in some of those areas based upon their lending strategy, which generally sits on the construction or acquisition rehab side. But then there's permanent financing needs, again, there's pre-development needs. And that's where not only did we need the GGRF funding to help move the deal flow forward, but even going forward, that's where private capital will play a critical role in moving this pipeline forward as well.
So if I hear you right, there's about $1 billion of projects that you've actually seen. They actually exist in a real place with real developers, real partners. And all it needs is as you say, a little boost to get them to be actually investable and move forward. Like where would that boost come from now?
Well, I think the boost would come from two sources. One would clearly be philanthropic support, because there's elements of the capital stack and elements of both the capital stack and the continuum where you do need some sort of concessionary financing to help parts of the transaction move forward. But then there's also market rate opportunities as well. A lot of these transactions, again, it's not that the bank or loan fund could not finance the transaction. It's the size of the transaction might be larger than what their customer limit might be. So if their limit is $3 million and the project's $5 million, that creates an opportunity to go to the private sector. They can get a transaction done at market pricing. It's just that you're actually helping that bank exceed its limits that it can lend at. And why this is really important, David, is because if you look at CDFI banks, for example, and loan funds, but just again, to make sure I'm getting the distinctions in the two correct, on the bank side, our CDFI banks actually have performance metrics that are meeting or exceeding money center banks, whether it's asset growth, deposit growth, loan portfolio growth, and then on the risk side, looking at areas like their loss portfolios, their looking at the non-accrual ratings that these banks have, they are at the level or exceed the level of money center banks. So for an investor to think about that, you have a partner taking skin in the game with you on a transaction whose underwriting and performance standards are basically matching the banks that you're normally going to for financing anyway. And to me, that's the power of how this CCIA program was created and the opportunity going forward to me to really engage private investors.
And just to follow up again, the 8 billion you mentioned, what would it take to get those projects going?
So if you recall, the acronym CCIA was Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, and the most important word in there was the accelerator part. And that 8 billion, so if you think about the 8 billion, you strip out the 1 billion, the 7 billion were the type of loans and opportunities that would have come from lenders that really needed some form of technical assistance support. It might have been a transaction that needed to be a CCI plus NCIF transaction in order to move forward. It might have needed state support or other things. And so when you think about the 7 billion, it's transactions that have some gradation of additional financing or technical assistance needs along the way.
Okay, and Amir, on that note, tell us a little bit more about like what this network of CDFIs and MDIs that you're working with, like what they need. So you're via the CCIA, you're providing technical assistance. You're trying to help build their capacity because they may not necessarily have those skills or be able to scale. Like just give us a little sense of your work.
And the strength of the network has always been their number one, their connection to community and their ability to see the difference between the actual risk in a transaction and what would be the perceived risk. So that's always going to be and always will be the number one benefit of partnering with a CDFI bank, loan fund, MDI. Where the gap comes in this space is that climate lending is a new area for most of them. There are some that have really established platforms like Beneficial State Bank or Sunrise or Climate First Bank, but the typical MDI, the typical CDFI bank is probably more in the individual opportunistic transactional stage. So again, if we're going back to the point of accelerating a model, the first thing we would need to do is find and raise capital that supports technical assistance support for those organizations to build the underwriting platforms, to modify their credit policies, to think about sort of capital that's needed that's not necessarily the debt capital, but things like credit enhancements or first loss money or interest rate buy downs. It's all of those things that really then create the differentiation between that set of deals that could move forward without some form of support and those that need additional support.
Okay, and you are actively raising money to help do some of that.
Yes, so we're very much focused on identifying high net worth family offices, philanthropic investors, those groups that the way I look at it, if you rewind to 2018 and there was no thought in anybody's mind of an IRA and a CCIA program and a GGRF, but wanted to figure out how to do community-based lending that's focused on clean energy and improving communities. What we're inviting is for them to step back to that day, think about why they were so passionate about that, what they were thinking about in terms of allocating their balance sheet toward, and then let's start having some conversations with us, with Climate United, with other partners, because we got a ton of ideas, we have a ton of pipeline, and we would love to help bring them back to that state and go deeper in investment again.
Right. Final question, Amir. I think the GGRF guidelines, was it 50% was supposed to be, and here's another acronym, LIDAC communities. And just give us the broadest view of like what's at stake if this doesn't come together, if this doesn't happen.
So what's at stake is already happening. If you go back to our filing under the current litigation, we had an affidavit filed by Friedman Bank, which is a green bank based in Atlanta, Georgia. And they detailed what would have happened if GGRF funding was cut off on January 1 of this year through June. We all know that June is the start of hurricane season in the Southeast. Had they been able to have access to for that funding over the first 6 months, they could quantify the number of houses that would be saved, the amount of mortgages that would not go into default, all because they were able to address weatherization issues in those homes. So that's what's at stake. Those homes, as we saw last year through Hurricane Helene, ripped right through low-income, distressed communities, LIDAC, ripped right through rural parts of the Southeast, flooded valleys, and had such negative impacts. So the cost of not being able to utilize the program is already going to be felt this season in that part of the country. So for any investor looking for a reason why to move quickly, why to go ahead and move forward, our partners in the field, our technical assistance providers, our community lenders, the developers, everyone in our network can already quantify for you the benefit of getting engaged right now.
Great, great. Well, thank you, Amir. And let's go to Curtis Probst. And Curtis, you've been at this a long time. I know you were excited about the GGRF money, but you've been doing deals, still doing deals. So just tell us how this all plays in your world, and maybe distinguish, the kinds of deals that you do versus some of the other ones that we've been talking about.
Yeah, so thanks for that, David. So first of all, you heard from Beth, and Climate United. Her organization is an awardee under NCIF, or National Clean Investment Fund. And you heard from Amir, and his organization, OFN, is an awardee under the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, or CCIA. We are a sub-awardee under the NCIF. So we are, not looking at billions of dollars of funding that we would have received from the GGRF, but rather tens of millions of dollars. So it's just a little bit different in terms of scale. What we do at NYCEEC is we are a nonprofit lender that focuses on community scale, clean energy, and energy efficient investment. So our loans are being made at the, $500,000 to $5 million range, order of magnitude, sometimes a little smaller, sometimes a little larger. So just to ground us in that. And, for us, we've been able to continue to originate and to close loans because we really started a capital raising process about 2 years ago. We thought that we would be getting a lot of GGRF grants or sub-grants, and we were going to need to crowd in private sector money to do that, because one of the major policy goals was really to crowd in private sector capital, to not have the clean energy transition financed entirely by federal government monies, but rather to use that to crowd in, bank money, philanthropy money, state and local government money, et cetera. So we've been capital raising for a couple of years now, and that capital has given us a cushion to continue to originate. So, just to give you a sense of where the money is coming from, because that's usually what finance people want to know, where's the money coming from, and also where it's going. I'll handle the first part first. We've closed on bank loans from commercial banks within the last 6 months. Investments from impact investors, which cover a pretty broad range of organizations. Philanthropic supporters, so some of that comes in the form of program-related investments, or PRIs. On our website, we just did a blog on PRIs. It's under our Insights section, so you can learn more about that. Funding from state and local governments. And then also loan guarantees, which in and of themselves don't provide capital, but we've sourced loan guarantees from philanthropic organizations, foundations, or groups of foundations. And that allows us to de-risk our balance sheet, which is actually a really important part of capital raising. That is what allows us to secure more funding. And we also have an insight piece on guarantees. I think the last form of capital raising, I want to take a moment, and this kind of amplifies something that Amir spoke to, which is loan participations. So at NYCEEC, if we have $5 million, we can make a $5 million loan and see $5 million of project funding. Plus, that capital will also include incentives and other things. So it'll fund a larger than $5 million project. But rather than fund one $5 million loan, what if instead we took our $5 million and found five $5 million loans? And we funded $1 million into each of those loans and then participated the other $4 million to private sector banks looking to expand in this area, CDFIs, and we've worked with a lot of CDFIs, impact investors. Now we've taken our $5 million and funded not $5 million of project loans, but $25 million of project loans. So that's really the power of the loan participations, and it allows us to have, in that example, 5x the amount of impact.
Well, so just to follow then, it sounds like there's both a pipeline of projects, sort of underwriting capability, a set of other partners other than the GGRF or the federal government. Is the market, viable and growing on its own? And if so, what was from your point of view, not broadly speaking, was GGRF, nice to have to have, and is there, a big hole, to fill now that it's not likely to come through?
Yeah, I mean, GGRF is transformational. It's $20 billion between the two competitions that we've been focused on here, or $27 billion if you also include the Solar for All competition, which is money's going to state and local governments. So, yes, it makes a huge difference. But, the clean energy transition order of magnitude is, trillions of dollars per year globally. So there is a lot of capital out there, and there are a lot of projects that still can get funded. Projects that we look at fit on a continuum, and some of them could only be financed with GGRF, and others can be financed, with other sources of capital. So that just gives you a sense of the context. And certainly we see, a lot of projects that are penciling out well now. I'd be happy to talk about the major food groups. I think Beth gave a good summary, but happy to get into that. But we continue to see a great pipeline.
Pipeline, I think, is the core of this call. So I would love to hear a little bit about that and how they how they fall on that spectrum.
Sure. So I think the first area, which is the largest area of focus for NYCEEC, is affordable multifamily, and that's both retrofits of existing buildings, so things like improvements to heating, ventilation, air conditioning, or adding rooftop solar. So there's the retrofit side, and then there's new construction where developers are developing highly energy efficient, affordable multifamily housing. Things that are built to, for example, a passive house standard or net zero energy, or all electric construction. We, in addition to the environmental benefits, there are so many co-benefits with that. We're improving the comfort for tenants. We're supporting local contractors. We're reducing energy costs at the building. We're increasing the reliability of buildings and their resilience. So that's a huge area. That's an area where there have been some federal incentives, but a lot of that work has worked historically without federal incentives. There are some state, local utility incentives in many cases, but not for everything. So that continues to be a big focus for us. That's probably 60% of our pipeline. And, we have challenges in this country broadly, and certainly in our area, with quality, affordable housing. And so this is squarely addressing that wherever you sit, on the discussion of climate change and environmental benefits. There's just a huge need in that sector. Second area I'll mention is on community solar projects. Solar has had relatively more challenges as of late with discussions of the investment tax credit and with tariffs, but we still see projects at community scale that are penciling out. And a lot of the benefits of community solar, not only lower customer energy costs, but also supporting grid resilience by creating energy at areas often that are very constrained in the grid. We certainly see that in New York City, where the city is, certainly Manhattan is an island. 4 of the 5 boroughs are detached from the mainland. There's a lot of grid constraints getting energy to the city. So that's been an important thing. And then the third area I'll mention is urban electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So within cities, and that can be for Uber and Lyft drivers, that can be for school buses, but huge benefits there as well. For one reason, it's reducing emissions, so that's having positive impacts on health. You don't have the idling school bus that's spewing emissions next to a bunch of children. We also see that it supports use of the grid, because a lot of the charging takes place at off-peak times, overnight. And so that makes much more efficient use of the infrastructure that we already have in place.
So I think the takeaway that if you're a project developer with a good project, you should still come forward, and there's still possibilities for you to get your project done.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Our pipeline is as big as it's ever been. And yeah, there are challenges. Interest rates are higher than they've been the last few years, but they're still very low by historic standards if you look at the last few decades. So there are challenges, but we continue to see really, really great opportunities.
Great, great. Let's jump to Aaron. Actually, Curtis, there's a question that you can take in the chat about when you do the loan participations, are you taking a subordinate position? But just in the interest of time, let's move on to Aaron. And Aaron, you've I think you may be an investor in all of these organizations, if I'm not mistaken. So you may know some of this, but just reflect on kind of what you've heard here in terms of the ecosystem or the market, as Amy and Beth were talking about, the market shaping that's already gone on, and kind of where we stand in terms of being able to carry this whole green lending build out forward.
Yeah, I think the market shaping, I'm glad we spent some time on that, because that is, I think, perhaps the most critically important part of this whole discussion. And yeah, we've been a partner in one way, shape, or form with everybody on the phone call today. I mean, if I was making a fantasy climate finance team, you three would be top of my draft list. So I'm really thrilled to be sort of sharing the virtual stage with you all. So I'm going to try to weave it together a little bit. Kresge is a $4 billion private philanthropy in Metro Detroit, but we work nationally. We've got a climate finance or a climate program, an environment program, but we are less about top line decarbonization, a lot more about this discussion about sort of distribution of benefits. This is why we're so keenly interested in this program. I think what Beth said early on about the climate finance sector in general, it's not like we don't have a climate finance sector in the US. It's actually massive, right? It's 200 billion plus, something like that. It just is massively dominated by huge utility scale projects, and then a much smaller share to sort of low carbon, no carbon transport, and then kind of like everything else. So we've got great big solar farms and wind farms that are really important for decarbonization. And I love that stuff. But unless you're living, next to one of them, it's not in your life much. And the distribution of benefits on the climate finance system has really dramatically benefited large scale utility companies and mostly wealthy people who own homes in suburbs who can afford to install solar panels on their roofs and use their personal credit to do so. So we've got a big distribution of benefits problem that I think is sort of core of what we're trying to address here. I also think Beth was very wise in sort of her point on the market and the way that capital flows. It is highest risk or lowest risk, highest return, lowest friction environment. And I think that friction part gets left out a lot. Capital does not like bumpy roads. So making it smooth is really important. That's the only way to get to scale, or we're just opportunistically fishing. I think it is understated. So I'll be the one who stated on this phone call, part of the way to smooth the road and to get better distribution of benefits is really the capital through which you distribute resources. And so, these organizations, this was really what the GGRF, I think in my mind, was about, in trying to recognize that energy burdened communities, particularly rural communities that are in most cases the most energy costs and most unstable and most vulnerable to climate events, have very little access to capital through traditional money-centered banks. That's just the nature of capital distribution in this country today. We saw this in the PPP program. We're seeing it again. So the tools are incredibly important, but it's really the institutions through which we are distributing those tools that I think long-term matter the most. And where you look at the places that have the lowest sort of economic inequality indexes, and you see a much broader diversification of capital channels than you see in places that have high inequality, high economic insecurity, almost inevitably have very, very low economic diversity, particularly in capital distribution. So I'll cite Brett Theodos on this. I think Amir's point and Curtis's point around having to work across the capital spectrum, very important, right? All of us who are sort of reform bankers know, I mean, you can have all the debt capital in the world, right? Money center banks functionally have unlimited capital. They are limited by the equity resources that they can lever off of, as well as the regulatory environment. And to Amir's point, many, many, many places, while the need is there, the sort of first rung on the capital string, which is largely going to be grant or state or local government funded, to sort of do the technical assistance piece is a major barrier. And that's the thing that Kresge is focused a lot on. Robin Hackey's work talks a lot about this and the ability of communities to absorb capital. And so I sort of would focus people on this because we are trying to build a finance machine, but the ground's got to be soft when we try to land it. So that's a big part of this. And then I think the last thing I'll say on this, sort of trying to tie it together, and I'll just give a couple examples of what we're trying to do, David, so folks can sort of see that this is real. I think that making the work visible is really important. And so, as I said, we drive by these solar farms, these wind farms where I live in Michigan, in northern Michigan. They're sort of like, big, scary, like, Stranger Things monoliths in the sky with their blinking lights. But when I drive around Detroit, I don't see solar panels on people's roofs, right? The community center that I frequent has no resiliency technology, has no bioswales, has none of this, right? Its distribution of benefits not only is it inequitable, but it's really about market adoption. So, for an example of what we're trying to do to make these climate projects work today, is working across sectors to try to get a twofer here. My colleague Joe Evans leads this work. We started in the community healthcare center space, right? Community healthcare centers, federally qualified community health care centers, or FQHCs, serve very low income populations, typically high Medicaid populations, but they are always embedded deeply in both rural and urban communities. They're mainstays. They've provided generational care in most cases. These institutions could certainly benefit from a reduction in utility costs, so energy production makes a lot of sense for them. But it's really the resiliency play that makes a huge difference for them, because when the power goes out and somebody needs their insulin stored, or somebody needs a transfusion, or something, whatever, emergency health care that they need, these centers must remain open. They cannot go dark. That's not an option. So resiliency is a massive play for them. And my colleague Joe has been working with a group called Collective Energy, moving across the federally qualified healthcare center space, working with their trade association to start with the early adopters, right? Let's find the 10, 15, 25 FQHCs who everybody knows in the country because they're leaders in their space. And let's both grant fund and provide PRI capital to them to get decarbonization, energy production, and resiliency on board. Let's scope it out. Let's bring capital partners to the table, and let's get this flywheel moving. And then we will march across their trade association to sort of the next level adopters, and then to the late adopters, and have a bit of a sort of package deal with some trusted capital providers as well as installers, engineers, and consultants, because they have day jobs. They are not going to figure out their own solar installation, or very few of them are going to figure it out on their own, and try to give them the tools that they need to get started and show the benefits to both their institution as well as the folks that they serve. And then secondarily, there's some really powerful research out of Berkeley about what happens in particularly low-income communities when you land green technology in their communities as a demonstration. The adoption rate like triples over time, over like the next 3 to 5 years. So we're trying to make it real, and we're going to march across other trade associations where people own lots of buildings or lots of land, who have a resiliency and a decarbonization and an energy savings need. And we're going to try to create these closed loop systems that we believe are quite financeable, as we learned with federally qualified healthcare centers and using new markets, a decade ago. These are financeable deals, but you have to have the adoption ready and the capital tools tweaked to meet the needs of these sort of specialized industries. So, we think large scale decarbonization is really important. I want huge utility companies and REITs and all these folks who own lots of assets to utilize this capital. But at the same time, I really want the Climate Uniteds of the world and the Justice Climate Funds and the NYCEECs to be doing the $500 to $5 million deals, not because they're capital inefficient. It's actually how we are going to get to scale, because we have been doing $200 billion worth of climate finance for quite a long time, and we haven't got there. It's not working. So we have to downscale, and we reach scale by 1,000 flowers blooming. So that's David. Maybe I'll stop there.
Great.
Okay, great. And I do have a follow-up question I want to come back to, Erin, but we wanted to bring in Rachel Halfacre from the Milken Institute, who has been doing some amazing work, like really on the ground and in the trenches. So Rachel, we'd love to hear a little bit about how you are trying to connect some of these very good projects in communities with capital, but also any of your thoughts on the broader discussion here in the market shaping.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I echo everything, but I particularly love the chat, Chris and Beth, that GGRF is not off the table for sure. It's just prolonged. I am a bleeding heart optimist, so I am confident in the work that Beth is leading to preserve GGRF. In the meantime, my and our ethos is let's keep the water warm for you when you're ready to go. And so for us at the Milken Institute, everything is about supporting pipeline and coordinating capital to make sure that this market maturation doesn't fall by the wayside while we're unfortunately playing defense. So what that looks like for us is really intentional focus on transactions, portfolio aggregation, and indexing products wherever they are today. So whether it's NYCEEC and the capital that you do have, or all the green banks on the call, what we've been doing are these deal rooms. And so in the last 60-minute calls, we've had $690 million worth of projects surfaced in these rooms. And we've had close to 100 capital providers that are desperate to put their capital to work because they've just spent the last 2 years putting their products together. And it's not as much as they need, and it's not as much as we all need to meet our collective goals, but it's not nothing. And so I think that what I saw Amir say in the Q&A is that now more than ever, we're seeing a lot of folks interested in co-investment coming together, learning about kind of what your products are, where they stand today. So for us, we're really excited to be part of this from a pipeline maturation perspective, and would love to have folks join if that's of interest, if you have projects or capital to put to work, because we are but stewards waiting for the full Monty to come down the pike.
Great, great. We are at the top of the hour. I think we're going to go a few minutes longer. So obviously, if you have to leave, feel free. But I do want to give folks a chance to have a final thought and a kind of call to action or next steps. And I do want to say, in my defense, I may have misspoken. I'm also hopeful on the litigation front. But I think that one of the takeaways I get from this call is that things move forward regardless, and that a lot of work that's been done is gonna pay off in all sorts of ways. With that, I want to give each of you a chance to just kind of have a final thought and then
Can I tee up Erin's?
What's that?
Can I tee up Erin's?
Okay.
And not to put you on the spot,
Sure.
but as we, talk to people, there seems to be an expectation that philanthropy is going to ride in and, save everyone and fill the gaps that the government is leaving, not just in GGRF, but we've seen the USAID funding disappear. I mean, in so many really critical areas. So how do you think, you gave us your perspective and I think that's valuable maybe to maybe end with a little bit here, if you could share that.
Yeah, I'm not going to complain to everybody about my philanthropic problems. Nobody wants to hear that. I will just say that, stating the obvious, this is a very difficult time. This is a very, very difficult time. There's a statistic that is bandied about that I'm not going to, sort of vouch for the veracity of, but this sort of what has been bandied about is if you took the sort of just already incurred, not within the reconciliation bill, but the sort of already incurred budget cuts, contract freezes, aid to state and local governments, et cetera, that has already been put on hold or frozen, that if you took all the endowments of of the at least listed private philanthropies in the country, we could fund that deficit for about 45 days. So, the scale of the wreckage is immense. And looking into the abyss on a reconciliation bill, particularly when you think about really dramatic cuts to things like Medicaid, which are going to put millions to tens of millions of people in really severe distress. It is. I'm just going to tell people, private philanthropy is not coming to the rescue here. We are not the answer. There is such severe demands on the capital today just to keep organizations alive at the moment that scaling capital is not, generally speaking, the business that private philanthropy is in. We can support organizations, we can pilot things, but growth capital it really is needed either from the public or private sector, some variation of both. To Curtis's point, there are ways that we can stretch and sort of moving beyond grant making into PRI making and into using our balance sheet to de-risk does allow us to get a little better leverage, a little better scale. And so I've got lots of partners, right? There are philanthropic collaboratives, Invest in Our Future, and the US, the MacArthur Foundation, and others are doing amazing work trying to sort of sustain the large scale market. And we are a small part of that. But what we can be is your most risk tolerant, most innovative, most patient partners inside of a capital stack and really help catalyze larger systems. And so, I certainly, as I said, we've been partners with everybody on this phone call and hope to be in the future. But the idea that private philanthropy is going to come in and fill the gaps on a sort of adverse decision in GDRF is not reality. It's not going to happen. So we have to band together and make sure that we may not move as fast as we wanted to move previously, and we may not reach all the people that we really want to reach, but that we sustain the momentum. Because all of these social movements, particularly private philanthropy has been involved in, have been long calls, right? Long calls. It has taken decades to get there. And I too was and am excited about the idea of getting a shot in the arm and being able to truly accelerate something. But we are in this for the long term. Whether or not those resources are there now or in the future, we are in this for the long term. And I think most of my private philanthropy colleagues would say the same.
Great. Maybe let's go in reverse order, and Curtis, just give us some next steps or takeaways or call to action.
Yeah, no, just maybe as a point of context setting, this work is never easy. I mean, we are filling gaps in the market. Almost by definition, we are doing things that regular commercial banks, finance entities don't find affordable, attractive, interesting within their remit, et cetera. So, as I said, this work is never easy. Right now, to Aaron's point, it feels really, really hard. But at the same time, we can maintain momentum. There are things that we can do to continue to do things, maybe not at the scale we would have liked, but there's lots to do. And, I think all the financiers on this call are doing this work. We've partnered with every one of the organizations on this call at one point or another at NYCEEC. So just, we can hold both things at the same time. We can have that realism that this is a tough time, but also at the same time, the optimism that there's still work to do and we have to keep doing this work.
Great. Amir?
Yeah, I guess sort of building off of both Aaron and Curtis's points, my perspective, and I think the perspective of JCF, is recognizing the moment that we're in and what is really sort of a profound transition that's going on as a result of the moment we're in. The solutions are going to be increasingly local, and it's time to get ahead as much as we can of helping those local partners to define what financing looks like for their communities. And I think also really beginning to think about the fact that clean energy financing can be less viewed, as it has often in the community development space, as an add-on, and more viewed as the driver behind how communities will be revitalized. And so I think that that's a huge part of how we're looking at it.
Great. And Beth, you get the last word.
So one, just on the GGRF side, we'll certainly say as last time I checked, you can't send a tweet, tell a lie, and make $20 billion of congressionally appropriated and obligated funds go away. And so we are very focused on continuing to push forward and make sure that these funds kind of have the impact that they were intentioned to have, and get to all the partners in the communities across the country who are ready and willing to put them to work. So that's first piece. But agree with everybody else that, this is, when you get to the local level, you really see how apolitical this work is. And so I'm heading out next week to DeQueen, Arkansas, a small town in southwest Arkansas, where we're seeing one of our first finance projects come to life. It's a local community of 6,000 people that has a public school system and local government that is going to be 100% 100% powered by solar energy. And in DeQueen and in so many places across the country, like this is not at all about politics. It's not about climate change. It's about adopting new technologies that save costs and make life better for local people. And I think staying focused on that, on the economic drivers, on the real benefits, kind of where we started this call, the real benefits of this work is going to keep us sane today, but also going to drive this continued momentum and path forward for years and decades to come. And so I think really appreciate everybody on this call, on the line, for continuing to put one foot in front of the other. I know some days it's hard, but it's critical for all of us, for our children, and certainly for the planet that we live on.
Great. Well, thank you. I was going to end with okay. I was going to end with just Amanda Lee who said it best as kudos to everyone here for staying focused, rolling with the punches, and being optimistic nevertheless. And thank you for joining us, and thank you for being part of. Thank you for being such agents of impact and being part of the Impact Alpha community. And thanks to everybody who joined the call. And we'll see you again on June 24th. For policy implications for shared prosperity. So thanks everybody. We'll have the replay on Friday. It's been a great call. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.